There is a place where the earth itself seems to breathe sorrow. On the northern edge of Kyiv, where apartment blocks now meet a stand of quiet trees, the ground folds into a deep ravine. Long before the war, it was called Babi Yar, Grandmother's Ravine. Once, it was only a landscape, a hollow carved by rain and time. Children sledded down its slopes in winter. Shepherds grazed their flocks in spring. But in the autumn of 1941, the ravine became a mouth that swallowed an entire people. Before the storm came, Kyiv was a city of light and clamour. Trams rattled along Kreshchatyk, the great boulevard. The Dnipro River glimmered under bridges of iron. On summer evenings, families strolled in parks while gramophones spilled the voices of crooners into the warm air. It was a city of books, of music, of argument. Among its inhabitants lived nearly 250,000 Jews, 1 in every 5 citizens, a tapestry of merchants, teachers, doctors, carpenters, and poets. They prayed in synagogues that smelled of candle wax and pine, wrote in Yiddish and Russian, sent their children to Soviet schools, and dreamed of a future that seemed certain. In Podil, the old Jewish quarter, bakers filled the streets with the smell of bread. On market days, women haggled over apples and cloth. Kiev's Jews had survived pogroms and revolutions. They believed the worst was behind them. But in the summer of 1941, history turned against them once more. On June 22nd, the sky filled with the drone of aircraft. Operation Barbarossa had begun, Nazi Germany's colossal invasion of the Soviet Union. Within weeks, German divisions poured across Ukraine. Behind the front came special squads of the SS, the Einsatzgruppen. Their mission was not conquest, but annihilation. The orders they carried were clear: destroy the Jewish intelligentsia, the communists, the Roma, the mentally ill, anyone defined as undesirable. Cities fell like dominoes: Smolensk, then Minsk, then Zhytomyr. Each left behind pits of bodies. When Kiev was encircled in September, its defenders fought hopelessly. The Red Army withdrew, leaving a city trembling. On September 19th, the Wehrmacht marched in. German banners hung from government buildings, and a new authority ruled: the SS and the military administration of the Reichskommissariat Ukraine. Occupation began with order and deceit. Loudspeakers proclaimed calm. Curfews were set, property inventoried, Jewish citizens registered. At first there was confusion rather than terror. Kiev's Jews had seen persecution before. Perhaps this would pass. But the occupiers carried a program far colder than pogroms of the past. 5 days after the Germans entered the city, a series of explosions tore through downtown Kyiv. Mines planted by the retreating Soviet NKVD ignited, destroying whole blocks and killing hundreds of German soldiers and Ukrainian civilians. The occupiers raged. SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckeln, commander of the police forces in Ukraine, sought vengeance. He met with the army command and with the head of Einsatzgruppe C, Paul Blobel. Their decision was swift. The Jews of Kyiv would pay with their lives. Posters appeared on street corners and walls, printed in German, Ukrainian, and Russian. They announced, "All Jews of Kiev and the surrounding area must assemble on Monday, September 29th, 1941, at 8 o'clock in the morning, at the corner of Melnikov and Doktorivska streets. Bring identification papers, money, valuables, warm clothing, and underwear. Those who fail to appear will be shot." The order carried the weight of law. People whispered in stairwells, unsure whether to believe it. Some thought they were to be resettled for work, others suspected deportation. But few imagined death. A Jewish woman later recalled, "We packed our blankets and bread. My father said, 'If we go peacefully, maybe they will send us to another town.' None of us understood." Sunday night, September 28th, was sleepless. The next morning, as dawn broke pale over Kiev, the streets began to fill. Columns of people moved northward, old men clutching prayer shawls, mothers with babies wrapped in quilts, children carrying cages of pigeons. Some neighbours watched from doorways. A few crossed themselves, others closed their shutters. Ukrainian police and German soldiers lined the roads, driving the crowd onward. The procession wound for miles. The sound of footsteps merged into a dull murmur broken by sobbing. By mid-morning, tens of thousands had gathered at the designated corner near the Lukyanivka cemetery. From there, armed guards funneled them through checkpoints. First came the tables where officials took identification papers and valuables. Rings, watches, banknotes, and documents were thrown into piles. Then came another command. Remove your coats, leave your luggage. As the crowd advanced, the orders grew harsher. Undress completely, shouted interpreters in Russian and Ukrainian. The victims hesitated. Rifle butts drove them forward. Naked, shivering, they were herded down a narrow corridor of barbed wire toward the ravine. From a distance came the staccato of machine gun fire. Those still in line understood too late. At the lip of Babi Yar, soldiers from Einsatzkommando 4A, assisted by the 45th Police Battalion and local auxiliaries, worked in teams. The method had been refined in other cities. Groups of 10 to 15 were forced to lie face down in the pit. Machine guns fired in bursts. The next group was ordered to lie atop the bodies. The shooters stepped on corpses to reach new victims. It was mechanical, practiced, almost industrial. An SS report written days later summarized the action in cold language. The Jewish question in Kiev has been solved. A total of 33,771 persons were executed on 29th and 30th September 1941. 33,771, each a human life reduced to a number on paper. Among them were infants, scholars, carpenters, soldiers, and singers. Entire families vanished, the Kaufmanns, the Rosenfelds, the Lurys. Few names survived. The killing went on from morning until evening, the rhythm of the gunfire steady, the screams fading into the wind. One young actress, Dina Pronicheva, was among those led to the ravine. In her post-war testimony she said, "They ordered us to lie down. I fell with my mother's body on top of me. I felt the earth moving. People were still breathing under the dead. When night came, I crawled out through the bodies. A German shouted. I froze and waited for the shot, but he turned away. I ran until I could no longer breathe." Her escape was one of only a handful. For most, there was no night, only an endless afternoon of killing. The shooters worked in rotation to keep their hands steady. Jekyll later boasted that his sardine-packing method maximized efficiency. When darkness fell on September 30th, the ravine was filled with layers of corpses. Soldiers scattered sand over the bodies. Some fired single shots to finish the wounded. The smell of blood hung over the northern outskirts of the city. Residents kilometers away heard the echo of gunfire. A farmer living nearby later said, "For 2 days the ground thundered, and then there was silence." That silence was deceptive. The killings at Babi Yar did not end with the Jews of Kiev. In the following months, thousands of Roma, captured Soviet prisoners, and Ukrainian nationalists were executed there. The ravine became a convenient grave, hidden from view yet within walking distance of the city's trams. By 1943, historians estimate, more than 100,000 people had been murdered in that place. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the ground. Dogs prowled among the mounds. German soldiers joked that the Jews are sleeping under the snow. In occupied Kiev, apartments once filled with Jewish families were seized by newcomers. The yellow stars disappeared from the streets because there was no one left to wear them. 2 years later, when the war turned and the Red Army began to advance, the Nazis sought to erase the evidence of their crime. In the summer of 1943, they organized a secret operation known as Action 1005. Under SS officer Paul Blobel, prisoners from nearby camps were brought to the ravine and forced to exhume the bodies. They built huge piles of railway ties, drenched them in gasoline, and burned the remains. For weeks, the smoke of human ash drifted over Kiev. The prisoners knew they would be killed when the work was done. One of them, Leonid Okunev, later testified, "We dug up the graves of our own mothers. We burned them and crushed the bones. We were living dead men." On the night of September 29, 1943, exactly 2 years after the first massacre, the prisoners revolted. They broke their chains and fled into the forest. 15 survived. Their testimonies would one day allow the world to know what had happened in the ravine. When the Red Army liberated Kyiv in November 1943, soldiers found Babi Yar half filled with ashes and bones. Investigators from the Soviet Extraordinary State Commission measured the pit, collected fragments of clothing, and photographed the remains. They counted the victims as tens of thousands of peaceful Soviet citizens. The word Jews appeared nowhere in their report. The truth had entered its second grave, the grave of silence. The soldiers who entered Kiev in November 1943 found a city of ghosts. Whole districts had been flattened by shelling and fire. Blackened walls gaped like broken teeth. Yet amid the ruins, the returning inhabitants whispered a single question: "Where are the Jews?" The answer lay to the north, in that ravine half filled with ash. The Red Army men who walked there were hardened by 2 years of war, but many could not bear the smell that rose from the frozen ground. Fragments of skulls, children's shoes, scorched hair. Everything spoke, even though no words came. The Soviet investigators worked methodically. They photographed the scene, measured the pits, and gathered testimony from peasants who had lived nearby. One old woman told them, "For 2 days, the earth shook." Afterwards, the dogs howled all night, yet when the official report was written, it described the victims only as peaceful Soviet citizens. The crime was acknowledged, but its Jewish identity erased. For Stalin's state, there was no space for particular suffering. All pain had to belong to the collective. The Holocaust, as the world would later name it, dissolved into a general tragedy of fascism versus socialism. The Jews of Kiev were buried again, this time under language. Still, some survivors tried to speak. Dina Pronicheva, the actress who had escaped the ravine, appeared as a witness at the Kiev war crimes trial in 1946. She stood in the courtroom, hands trembling, and told her story before a crowd of soldiers and journalists. "I saw with my own eyes how they drove mothers with infants to the edge. They shot the babies first, then the mothers. The ground moved after they left." Her testimony lasted hours. When she finished, the hall was silent. The transcript was filed, then hidden in archives for years. Meanwhile, the victors rebuilt. The Soviet Union emerged from the war both triumphant and traumatized. Millions were dead, cities razed, and yet the narrative demanded unity, not division. In newspapers, the massacre at Babi Yar was mentioned only in passing, usually without the word Jew. To emphasize Jewish victimhood was considered bourgeois nationalism, a threat to socialist harmony. Through the 1950s, Kiev expanded northward. The ravine lay on the city's fringe, neglected, half forgotten. Factories dumped waste into it. Bulldozers leveled its sides. Brick kilns covered parts of the ground that had once held bones. Children played there again, not knowing what slept beneath their feet. In 1952, the state's paranoia turned inward. Stalin's regime launched an anti-Semitic campaign against rootless cosmopolitans. Jewish intellectuals were purged, writers were imprisoned, doctors were accused of plotting to poison Soviet leaders. To speak of Jewish suffering became dangerous. The memory of Babi Yar receded into whispers around kitchen tables. Then, in the spring of 1961, the ravine struck back. A dam holding back a reservoir of industrial sludge burst. A wall of mud and water swept through the nearby district of Kurenivka, destroying homes and tram lines. More than 100 people died, though the authorities claimed far fewer. Locals said it was as if the dead had refused to stay buried. That same year, a young poet named Yevgeny Yevtushenko arrived in Kyiv on a reading tour. Walking through the overgrown valley, he was stunned to find no monument, no plaque, not even a sign. He later wrote, "There was only grass and wind. No one had told me that 33,000 people lay beneath it." Back in Moscow, he poured his outrage into verse. The poem Babi Yar opened with words that would shake an empire. "No monument stands over Babi Yar, a drop sheer as a crude gravestone. I am afraid. Today I am as old as the entire Jewish race itself." In a nation that insisted all its martyrs were the same, Yevtushenko dared to name the Jews. The poem condemned not only Nazi hatred but the anti-Semitism that still lingered in Soviet life. It was a poem of conscience, and it spread like fire. Students memorized it. It was read aloud in dormitories, copied by hand, shared in whispers. Some hailed it as courage, others called it treachery. But the silence had been broken. One of those moved by the poem was the composer Dmitri Shostakovich. He had lived through the siege of Leningrad, had seen entire cities starve, and now saw truth smothered by bureaucracy. In 1962, he completed his symphony number, 13, subtitled Babi Yar, with Yevtushenko's poem as its first movement. Low voices of a male chorus sang the lines in mournful unison, supported by deep strings that pulsed like a heartbeat. When it premiered in Moscow, the audience wept, but officials squirmed. Censors demanded that Shostakovich remove the references to Jews and rewrite the text to praise Soviet heroism. The composer refused. For years, the work could not be performed openly. Yet tapes circulated underground, and listeners knew the ravine had found its music. While poets and musicians gave voice to the dead, the state continued to shape its own version of history. In 1976, the Soviet authorities finally erected a massive bronze monument at the site. It showed a group of generic Soviet citizens in heroic struggle, their faces turned upward. The inscription read simply, "To the Soviet people, victims of fascism." The word Jew appeared nowhere. Even so, people came. On September 29th each year, small groups gathered quietly to lay flowers, light candles, and recite Kaddish in hushed voices. KGB officers watched from a distance, taking notes. The risk did not matter. One participant later said, "We came because silence was worse than fear." As the years passed, Babi Yar became more than a place. It became a symbol of suppressed truth. Writers and dissidents invoked it as shorthand for every forbidden memory in the Soviet Union. To say Babi Yar was to speak of everything buried by the regime: individuality, faith, compassion. By the 1980s, change stirred. Under glasnost, archives opened and historians began to publish what had long been hidden. Photographs emerged, along with testimonies from aging witnesses. For the first time, Soviet readers saw the German report listing the exact number, 33,771. They learned of the follow-up executions, the burning of the corpses, the revolt of the forced labourers. Babi Yar was no longer a rumour but a documented fact. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine inherited not only independence but a heavy past. That September, on the 50th anniversary of the massacre, thousands gathered at the ravine. Candles flickered in the twilight. A new monument, a bronze menorah, was unveiled. Small compared with the heroic statue of 1976, but honest. Its plaque read, "To the Jews of Kiev, victims of the tragedy of Babi Yar." For many, it was the first time the victims were called by their true name. That evening, an elderly woman stepped forward. She was one of the last survivors. In her trembling hands, she held a faded photograph, a family portrait taken in 1940. She placed it at the base of the menorah and whispered, "At last you have a place." Freedom brought light, but also confusion. When Ukraine declared independence in 1991, it inherited not only new borders, but the burden of memory. Decades of censorship had left history fractured. Truth had to be pieced together from whispers and archives. For the first time, newspapers printed the full story of the ravine, its victims, its numbers, its silence. Historians published testimonies hidden since 1946. School children read Yevtushenko's poem openly. The symphony that had once been banned played on national radio. The park around the ravine changed slowly. Grass still waved where blood had soaked the earth, but now visitors came with candles instead of fear. The air was heavy yet calm, as if the ground itself listened. Families recited names from yellowed letters. Rabbis intoned prayers beside Orthodox priests. The layers of silence began to peel away. In the years that followed, new monuments appeared, small plaques, individual markers, private gifts from families who had no graves to visit. One memorial honored Roma victims, another commemorated the children of the psychiatric hospital who had been shot there in 1942. Each edition was a fragment of the truth, set into the landscape like shards of glass catching the sun. Yet remembrance was not simple. Ukraine was a country wrestling with its past, Soviet oppression on one side, Nazi collaboration on the other. The war had left wounds within wounds. Some Ukrainians had fought in the Red Army, others had joined nationalist militias that, in places, abetted German forces. The ravine forced everyone to look inward. Who had stood by? Who had watched? Who had risked everything to save a neighbour? For every answer, another question rose. Through the 1990s, survivors dwindled. Each passing year stole a voice that had witnessed the horror. Journalists recorded their stories quickly, afraid time would close the book again. One survivor, now frail and blind, said softly, "I tell my story not for pity, but for proof. When I am gone, only the wind will speak for us." In 2001, on the 60th anniversary of the massacre, a massive public commemoration filled the park. Politicians, clergy, and citizens stood shoulder to shoulder under a cold sky. For the first time, Ukrainian and foreign leaders spoke the words Holocaust and Jews of Kiev from the same podium. Television broadcast the ceremony across the world. It had taken 60 years for those words to be said aloud on that soil. But Babi Yar was never just a site of Jewish memory. It was also a mirror for universal conscience. The genocide there had devoured Roma, Ukrainians, Russians, and prisoners of war. Remembering one group did not diminish another. It deepened the meaning of all. Slowly, the idea of a comprehensive memorial took shape, a place that would honor every victim and educate every visitor. Artists, architects, and historians proposed designs. Some imagined a vast museum with subterranean halls following the contour of the ravine. Others wanted only trees and names carved in stone. Debate flared. How does one commemorate the incomprehensible? Can art bear such weight? A poet wrote, "Build no temple over Babi Yar. Let the sky be the roof and the grass be the floor. Let every visitor walk barefoot and remember." During these years, researchers across Europe began to understand that the Holocaust had not been confined to camps with gates and barbed wire. It had begun in open air, in fields, ditches, and ravines. French priest and historian Patrick Desbois travelled village to village across Ukraine, interviewing elderly peasants who had seen the shootings as children. He called it the Holocaust by bullets. Babi Yar was its epicenter, a place where genocide was both intimate and public. His work confirmed what survivors had always known. The killings had unfolded in plain sight, before the eyes of neighbors. In the early 2000s, Ukraine faced new turbulence, political upheaval, revolution, war in the east. Amid these storms, memory again risked being overshadowed. Yet the idea of a great memorial persisted. Foundations and governments pledged support. Jewish organizations worldwide saw in Babi Yar not only tragedy, but a lesson written in earth. That denial begins when remembrance fades. Plans coalesced into what would become the Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, an ambitious project combining research, art, and education. Some welcomed it as long overdue, others feared it would commercialize grief. Arguments filled newspapers. Who owns memory? Who has the right to interpret the dead? But beneath the debate was something sacred, the recognition that the ravine still mattered, that the dead still asked to be named. During the 75th anniversary in 2016, the ceremony drew thousands. Survivors, diplomats, and ordinary citizens stood under grey skies as a choir sang a Ukrainian lullaby. An elderly rabbi whispered a prayer. A young student recited lines from Yevtushenko's poem. The president spoke simply. Babi Yar is a wound that belongs to all humanity. Cameras captured faces streaked with rain and tears. The images flashed across the world, a reminder that even after 3/4 of a century, the earth had not healed. For historians, the ravine became a case study in memory itself. Why had it taken so long to speak? How had ideology buried the truth so deeply? They traced how official language had sanitized atrocity, how archives had hidden testimony, how art had forced remembrance back into the light. In that story lay a warning. Every society is capable of forgetting what it fears to confront. In the 21st century, visitors walking through the park may find it hard to imagine what lies below. The trees are tall, the grass soft, the noise of the city muffled. Children ride bicycles along the paths. Only the monuments break the calm. A bronze menorah, a small cross, a stone shaped like a book left open to the sky. At sunset, the shadows lengthen across the ground where the victims once lay. The contrast is unbearable and necessary. Educators now bring students here to learn. They tell them about the Nazi doctrine of racial war, about the bureaucracy of death, about how propaganda paved the road to murder. They speak of the courage of those who hid a neighbor, forged a document, whispered a warning. They explain that genocide does not begin with bullets, but with words, when people are divided into us and them. Every generation hears that lesson differently, yet its urgency never fades. Archival research continues to reveal names. Historians have identified more than 10,000 individual victims so far, men, women, and children once lost to anonymity. Each name added to the database is a resurrection of sorts. Families from Israel, the United States, and across Europe come searching for traces of grandparents or cousins. Many find nothing but a line of text, but even that is enough, a sign that memory has survived oblivion. The ravine has also become a place of interfaith dialogue. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim leaders gather there on anniversaries to read prayers from their traditions. They speak not only of the past, but of the responsibility of the living. One imam once said, "If you listen, the wind here sounds like the word enough. Enough blood, enough hate." Artists continue to respond to Babi Yar in new ways. Painters render the landscape as abstract fields of red and black. Composers weave choral works from fragments of survivor testimony. Filmmakers retrace the path of the doomed procession through modern streets. Each interpretation is an attempt to bridge the unbridgeable, to give voice where voices were silenced. In Kiev's museums, photographs line the walls. A tattered coat, a violin found in rubble, the official German order that began with bureaucratic neatness. All Jews of Kiev are to assemble. Visitors stop before these objects in silence. The simplicity of the paper and ink contrasts with the enormity of what followed. Evil, they realize, often comes dressed as administration. Every few years, controversy returns, debates about funding, about design, about who tells the story. Yet perhaps disagreement itself is proof that memory is alive. Total silence would be worse. As one historian put it, Babi Yar must remain unfinished. Only the dead are complete. The 21st century brought new shadows over Ukraine: political upheaval, revolution, invasion. But even amid these storms, people kept returning to the ravine. In 2021, on the 80th anniversary of the massacre, survivors, their descendants, and world leaders stood together beneath a steel-grey sky. Many were born long after 1941. Still, they wept. The ceremony was brief, but its silence was long. In that silence, one could almost hear the faint echo of footsteps, the same steps that had crossed the city toward death. By then, only a few of the original witnesses remained. They spoke slowly, their memories sharp as glass. One, his voice nearly gone, said into a microphone, "I remember my mother's hand. I was 5. She told me to be brave. I ran. I never saw her again." Another simply whispered, "Tell them we were here." Each testimony was a bridge across time, binding the living to the dead. The Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial Center opened sections of its research complex that same year. Inside were thousands of digitized documents, Nazi reports, Soviet files, personal letters. Interactive maps traced the paths of deportations. A sound installation let visitors hear the names of victims read aloud, one after another, a litany of restoration. It was not spectacle, but witness. Outside, the ravine itself remained largely untouched. Planners had agreed that the earth should stay as it was, unexcavated, unpaved. Grass covers the mass graves, birch trees mark the edges. Nature, at last, guards the dead. Each spring the leaves return, green over crimson soil. For Kyivans, Babi Yar is both familiar and foreign. It lies within the city, yet feels apart, a space where time folds. Couples stroll through on weekends. Children ride bicycles. Joggers pass the monuments. Life continues above the silence. That coexistence, ordinary life above extraordinary death, is perhaps the truest memorial of all. It reminds the city that civilization and barbarity can share the same ground. The war that erupted again in 2022 brought new peril to Kiev. Missiles struck nearby districts. One blast shattered windows of the television tower that stands near the ravine. Smoke drifted once more over Babi Yar. The symbolism was unbearable. Commentators around the world wrote that history had circled back, that the ground of massacre had again witnessed violence. Yet the monuments endured, untouched. Candles still burned at dusk. Even under fire, remembrance persisted. Today, 80-plus years after the shots first echoed through the ravine, Babi Yar has become more than a site of mourning. It is a classroom, a pilgrimage, a moral compass. Every school in Kiev includes the story in its curriculum. Tour guides lead groups along the path the victims walked. They stop at the place where the notices were posted and read them aloud. The words are simple, bureaucratic, chilling. Visitors often remark that the horror begins in the calmness of those sentences. Artists from across the world continue to respond. A Ukrainian filmmaker recently recreated the last journey of a Jewish family, filming along the original streets in black and white silence. A German sculptor designed a piece made of shattered mirrors arranged in a circle, so that every viewer sees themselves reflected among fragments, an image of complicity and responsibility. A choir in Tel Aviv performs Shostakovich's Symphony No. 13 each year on September 29th. The bass's low voices seem to rise directly from the earth. Poetry, too, keeps returning to the ravine. After Yevtushenko, many others have written of it, each finding a different tone: anger, grief, awe, guilt. One modern Ukrainian poet ends her piece with a line that could serve as an epitaph for them all. The wind at Babi Yar carries no blame, only memory. But memory is enough to change a heart. Historians still uncover layers of the story. New documents reveal how meticulously the killings were planned, the logistics of ammunition, the rotation of firing squads, the record-keeping of valuables taken from the dead. Reading these files, one feels the chill of bureaucracy turned lethal. Yet amid that cold precision appear flashes of humanity. A German soldier who smuggled out a child, a Ukrainian nurse who hid a wounded girl, a peasant who left food near a hiding place. Their courage does not erase the crime, but it prevents despair from being complete. The ravine has also become a meeting place for reconciliation. German presidents have bowed there, Israeli prime ministers have prayed, Ukrainian leaders have pledged that the victims will never again be forgotten. Each speech adds another layer to the long conversation between past and present. None can undo the loss, but each acknowledges it. In museums across Europe, Babi Yar now stands beside Auschwitz, Treblinka and Majdanek as a symbol of absolute evil. Yet it also represents something distinct, the public face of genocide, unhidden by walls or smokestacks. It teaches that mass murder can occur in daylight, among trees, in full view of the world. That is its enduring terror and its warning. Walk there today, and you will see no trenches, no barbed wire, no evidence of war. Only the land undulates gently, concealing its depth. On certain mornings the mist settles low, and the ravine looks like a scar half-healed. Birds nest in its sides. Children throw stones down and wait for the echo. The echo always comes, faint but clear, as if the earth answers back. To remember Babi Yar is to confront the fragility of civilization. The people who died there were teachers, tailors, shopkeepers, poets. They trusted the city that betrayed them, the neighbours who fell silent, the logic that promised order. In less than 48 hours, the line between ordinary life and annihilation vanished. That line is thin still. Every generation must redraw it. That is why the story is told again and again, not to reopen wounds, but to keep conscience awake. Forgetting is the beginning of repetition. Memory is resistance. There is a Hebrew saying, "The secret of redemption is memory." At Babi Yar, that truth is literal. Each name recovered redeems a fragment of humanity. Each visitor who pauses in silence becomes, for a moment, a guardian of the past. In 2025, a new digital memorial is planned to project those names onto the night air, tens of thousands of points of light hovering above the ravine, forming constellations that fade and return. It will not illuminate the dead, it will remind the living. For every light extinguished, another memory kindled. What, then, is Babi Yar today? It is a grave without walls, a warning without end, a testament written in soil. It tells us that hatred thrives on indifference, that evil depends on the obedience of the ordinary, that silence is never neutral. And it tells us, too, that remembrance is a form of love, the last gift the living can give the dead. Imagine standing there at dusk. The city hums behind you, the wind stirs the grass. You know that beneath your feet lie the remains of 33,000 people who once dreamed, argued, sang, prayed. You feel the weight of their absence and the persistence of their presence. The ravine is quiet now, but not empty. It holds the world's most fragile promise, that such things can be remembered and therefore perhaps prevented. Yevtushenko ended his poem with a vision of hope. Let the Internationale ring out, when the last anti-Semite on earth is buried forever. In my blood there is no Jewish blood, but I am hated by every anti-Semite as a Jew, and therefore I am a true Jew. His words still echo because they speak not of identity but of empathy, the recognition that another's pain is our own. To feel that is to keep Babi Yar alive in the only way that matters. The sun sets behind the hills of Kiev. The ravine darkens and the city lights begin to glow. Life moves forward as it must. But beneath that life runs a current of remembrance, steady and silent. The earth remembers. The wind remembers. And through us, so does humanity. For as long as someone stands at Babi Yar and whispers, "Never again," the ravine will not be only a grave, it will be a vow. If you found this video meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more people hear and remember these stories.